Welcome back to the Sampleist from wherever you're tuning in from around this big beautiful musical world. My name's Greg Revell and today it's a great day. Spitfire has launched their new bundle, the Originals Orchestra, and we're down for taking a good hard look at it. The Originals Orchestra is a great starting point if you're new to writing orchestral music. You get strings, brass, woodwinds, percussion, pads and piano, all the tools you'll need to create beautiful music for today's modern scores. The Originals Orchestra gives you the opportunity to expand your compositional skills with these great tools. The Originals Orchestra downloads at 15.3 gigabytes installed and is housed in Spitfire's own easy-to-use plugin. And it goes without saying that while I'm very grateful to the team at Spitfire for kindly making this library available for review today, they've had no input whatsoever into the content of this video. We're very proud at the Sampleist of our independence, so you can be assured that this review is totally my unbiased and unvarnished view. And before we kick things off, if all things virtual instruments really rocks your world, then you're in the right place. You can support us by smashing the like button and subscribing to the channel and ringing that notification bell right now. It's the best way to spread the word to other like-minded people just like you who want to stay on top of the latest releases in the world of virtual instruments. Let's fire up the door and go deep on Spitfire Audio's Originals Orchestra. And here's the Spitfire audio plugin that houses the entire Originals Orchestra. What you heard me play then was some chords live using just the strings long patch, and we'll dive into some more details shortly. If you're new to orchestral composition and you don't yet have a library that has all the parts of the orchestra, this might be a great introduction into that world. Maybe you've already got the BBC SA Discover, maybe you've outgrown the Labs libraries, and now you can step up into the next tier to give you a more comprehensive sweep of all the orchestral sounds available. And at $99 or euros or indeed pounds, this is a fantastic introduction. You're very lucky in many respects because when I started playing with orchestral plugins and orchestration, there was no such thing as the Originals line, and there was no such thing as Labs. I remember I had to stump up the cash on pre-order to get the BBC SO Orchestra in one big, massive 1 terabyte download. I loved every minute of it. I don't regret it for a second, but in a different time, I would have had a series of stepping stones. And I think this is what Spitfire Audio is doing here, is providing you that next stepping stone to the next tier. Okay, a brief overview of the plugin itself. For those who aren't familiar, very simple to use. You load up your patch, in this case the strings. You can select your articulations. The strings has quite a rich set of articulations, including a live articulation. There's a long CS, consordino. A consordino is a small rubber mute that the string players apply to give that soft, muted, silky sound. There's shorts, a patch for short ostinatos. An ostinato is a short sequence of notes in repetition, pizzicato, and then a series of long, slow, swelling sounds, including a consort, longs in octaves, and consort in octaves as well. You have the familiar CC11, which is your expression, like a volume, CC1 on the right for dynamics. On the right, this big wheel allows you to adjust the parameters that are available for this patch, and in this case, you can adjust the reverb and wind it up and down, or indeed the release. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. Quickly, down the bottom, 3 microphone positions: close, the room, and in this particular case, one called stretch. The third one you'll find may vary depending on the patch and the instrument being loaded. And finally, over on the bottom right, the same parameters you have in the big knob wheel are also available down below to adjust reverb and release. You'll notice that tightness is grayed out, which means it's not available for this particular articulation, because the concept of tightness, which is about how do you want the orchestra to sound? Do you want them to be really rigidly tight together, or do you want them to be a little looser so it sounds a little bit more organic? That's only available in short articulations. So let's dive straight into the strings. Here you have the long patch. This is what you heard in the opening sequence I had earlier. Long, sustained notes. Played as individual notes. What I want to point out, a little tip, use the release trigger. The release parameter here is how long the release trigger, a sample, rings for after you lift your finger off the keyboard. So if you have it really down, really low, have a listen very closely. You'll hear between the notes what sounds like a slight sucking sound because there's no release. Which can make it sound a little bit artificial. There's a little bit of a tip. If you put the release right up, what that means is that the release sample, when you lift your finger off the key, resonates and rings a little longer, and it blurs the lines between each of the transitions. Give you those long, epic, sweeping sounds. The live articulation is quite an interesting one. It's a combination of like a staccato note at the start, also playing the long sustain at the same time. So it's kind of like a percussive note at the start of each note, like maybe a Mikado sound. What's cool about it is that means that you can actually play through a sequence of longs a few short notes in the middle, which normally wouldn't work with a long patch. But with the live patch, you can almost get away with it. Moving on, you've got the long consordino. As I mentioned earlier, consordino is a small rubber mute that string players apply to give their strings a softer, muted, silky sound. This is what this sounds like. Lovely stuff. What else have we got here in the strings? This is the shorts. Short ostinato is a new one. It's designed, as the name suggests, for ostinato-like passages, and an ostinato is a short phrase of repeating notes. You'll forgive the clunky ostinato playing that live, but it's a great patch for those very short staccatissimo type of sounds. Pizzicato, I'm sure we're all familiar with. And then finally, maybe some long slows. As the name suggests, sort of a long swelling. Another tip I want to throw in here too, if you don't have one already, you might want to invest in a simple sustain pedal. I'm using a sustain pedal which is attached to CC64, and as the name suggests, it's like a typical sustain pedal on a piano. So you play a note. If you have a look at the keyboard, the small keyboard, it might be slightly hard to see, but if you have a look, I'm obviously depressing the keys down. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to depress the sustain pedal down, and then I'm going to take my hands off the keyboard and the note will still ring. There you go. Now I lift my foot off and there the note stops. So it's really handy to actually create smoother transitions using sustain pedal. Hit the sustain pedal, go to the next chord. Hit the sustain pedal. There you go, another cheat for you. And to round out the conversation for strings, we can't go past the long octaves, the big epic sound. Epic stuff, great down on the bottom end. You can't get too much of the big epic sound, can you? And likewise, epic shorts, the staccato version of what we just heard. Actually, let's put the close mics up a bit. See if we can bring it a little bit forward in the room. Awesome. Cool's that. And that covers off the epic strings. Let's go over and have a look at some epic brass. So here's the epic brass patch. No orchestra complete without some heavy duty brass to thunder your way through your compositions. This one's the live patch, just like the strings version. It has a percussive sound at the start of the note followed by a sustain. Gorgeous. Now the long patch, as the name suggests, is just the big epic long, but doesn't have that percussive sound at the start. As always, don't forget your CC1 and CC11 to control the dynamics. From soft to epic. I think the close room mic sounds really good, brings it to the front a little bit more. And if you really want to go uber big, there's a bit of brass metal here, if you like, with some distortion. Check this out. If metal brass is your thing, you have distortion to play with as well. Cool, moving along. And finally, the shorts, the staccato. Epic in every sense of the word. Brass shorts to really give that fire and punch and sound. Beautiful stuff. Cool, so let's have a look at some woodwinds. Let's bring them up. The live patch, like all its other cousins, has that staccato percussive sound at the start. And if you play at the high register on the woodwind scale, you're going to get up to the region where the flutes are. But as you move down through the range, you get to the oboes, clarinets, and down into the range of the bassoons. Big heavy bottom end, lovely stuff. And similarly, the longs and the shorts for the woodwinds also. Let's have a quick listen to the longs. Probably in the bassoon range there. Getting into the clarinets, oboes. And into the flutes. So here's the Firewood piano. Every orchestra needs a piano to give it the bright top end of the strings. What you've also got is some pads that go with it. It gives you a softer sound. I'm going to bring the close mics down a little bit, bring the mids up a bit. You also get the lovely felt. So let's add the felt with the pad. And even thrown in some warps if you want to add some manipulated strings. So there you have it. There's your overview of the piano, a must-have in any orchestral library. Very, very rich indeed. And to round out this overview, let's have a look at the cinematic pads. You get a huge range of pads to play with to give you that lovely harmonic support to a lot of your orchestral compositions. Let's have a quick random play of a few selections. Won't have enough time to go through all of it, but you'll get a feel for it. A huge range of potential there to round out all of this Originals library. So there you go. There's your complete walkthrough from top to bottom through the strings, the brass, the woodwinds, the percussion, the Firewood piano, and finally the cinematic pads. I hope you agree. I reckon this is an epic library. If you want to get into that middle tier of an orchestral library, this is production quality stuff. You're ready to go and play under your fingertips. Hope you enjoyed that walkthrough. So what we're going to do now, I'm going to show you a short composition I wrote using the entire library. And on the other side of that, I'll quickly walk you through some of my decisions and some of how I came to the decisions I did. And then I'll give you my final thoughts and roundup. Okay, so there you have it. There's my simple composition. I've tried to use a little bit of everything from the Originals Orchestra. It's a simple chord progression. Let's have a quick look at that. It is simply a chord sequence based on D major, goes to G, cycles back and forth, changes up to B minor, and then returns to its happy place with Gs and Ds and A's, and then just repeats. So nothing terribly sophisticated there. And I think that's probably the essence of maybe a simple composition is don't try to be too busy. Less is more in many cases, in most cases. In terms of how I've laid it out, a simple sort of strategy for maybe orchestration, there's an introductory section here at the start, there's a middle tier section, and then the final coming home with a wet sail crescendo at the end there. How I started it, it was just simply maybe holding down a simple drone in the strings. I think drones are great. And in this case, just a long consort patch. And it just holds that note, and it might just add a couple of lower supporting notes. And that felt like it needed to have a little bit of a flute melody. So, of course, let's do that. Here it is. And maybe just to round it out, some pianos and some cinematic pads that gives it a little bit of choral air. A lovely little intro. And then into the second piece, which is introduced with some percussion and a crescendo, if you like. And so all I did there was I chose a swell and also a cymbal swell together. What I've done here is, rather than keeping the MIDI, I've just taken the MIDI note and I've bounced it out as an audio patch here. I just find with simple percussion, simple swells, I like to just work with the audio, so that's all that is. And then it enters into a sweeping plain strings. So here it goes. Whoops, let's go back a bit. And into a simple melody. That uses a couple of... Let's stop there just for a minute. I'll give you a quick overview of that. So I've got a longs high patch and I've got a longs low patch. So because the Originals Orchestra is a set of ensembles, it means that you can only load one patch at a time. Obviously, when you're playing with it, you can't switch or context switch between the different articulations. So if you need different articulations from the same plugin, then you need to have multiple instances of it. So that's why I've split things out into longs and shorts. So there you can see there these two string lines, they basically follow each other about an octave apart in support with the low bass. A little tip for strings writing too, give them a lot of space in the low end, meaning wide intervals. They really resonate. And as a simple rule of thumb, octaves are a really good basis. And that's roughly what I've got here. They all hang around the Gs and the Ds and the F sharps together. And they deviate a little bit in the upper strings just to give it a bit of extra colour. The extra thing I've thrown in this section is I've got myself some brass to be introduced. And the brass here, you can see it here, it's playing the role, it sits about a third above the upper strings. So from F sharp to A to the Ds, between G and B, there's your third, A to C sharp, B, what's this one? Yeah, B to D is your third again. So that adds a lovely harmony on top of it. So have a listen to these two and let's see what they sound like. And here comes some brass. And they come together in thirds and octaves. And then to repeat the whole pattern once over, I thought at the end of this phrase, let's have a bit of staccato strings. Exactly what this patch was made for. Short ostinato. And at the end of this phrase, we get which holds throughout to the rest of the piece. Some simple triad staccato, nothing sophisticated at all. And then ultimately what I want to do is obviously build a bit of power and strength. So having repeated the same patterns, I've got the same string sections supporting the staccato. I've also got some epic brass together that are supporting each other in the low end and that brassiness. Again, have a look at the patterns there, roughly a third apart, or an octave and a third apart in this case, to give that harmonic bass. So what we've got is, and the simple thing to remember here with the orchestration is a lot of it is based on octaves and doublings. So sometimes it can be tempting when you've got all these instruments in an orchestra that you feel you have to have every single patch in use with about 112 tracks, and in all honesty, you don't. In many cases, in order to sound really cohesive and really together, just let your strings and your instruments double each other and support each other even with the same notes, or at the very least some simple intervals as I've got here, about a third between them. So putting it all together, some woodwinds too. I just did exactly the same thing with the woodwinds. You can see then I've literally copied and pasted from the brass line. I might have shifted it up an octave, and it all builds into a crescendo. I've added some piano. What does the piano sound like? Its piano is nothing more than just simple triad block chords. Have a look at that. Simply just triad block chords. So with all those pieces coming together, I'm repeating the same phrase as the opening phrase, but maybe with a bit more depth and power starting to build. And then it all comes home with a massive crescendo at the end. So let me play that. Whoops, excuse me. I should have introduced the melody line, which sits right on top. Again, a soaring live, no, it's a soaring longs patch here. And I thought, let's just put the melody on top of all the other strings in the upper register to give it some clear space. And it introduces it quite well. And what does every epic piece need to close it out with? Some thunderous staccato and a well-rounded ending. So there you go. There's an overview of my short composition. I hope you found that helpful. I've tried to cover off all aspects of the orchestra. We've got our woodwinds, there's strings, there's a healthy dose of brass. We've got some piano and pads in there. The percussion wasn't utilised heavily. I didn't feel like it really needed it, but a nice swell at the start there to introduce it might do the trick, but it could well do some extra. Maybe you might think about how you could do that. Some take-homes for the beginning composers. With your orchestrations, keep things really, really simple. Don't fall into the trap that me and many hundreds, if not thousands of other budding composers do, is when you get a new library, you feel like you have to use every single articulation of every patch in the entire library in every composition. And I assure you, I learnt the hard way, but over time, you don't. You just have to keep things really simple. So less is more is a very good philosophy to hold. Strings in the low end, love to have a lot of space between them, between the very low end with the basses and the cello. Maybe at octaves is a really good starting point. You can have some supporting harmonies with the bass. Again, the mid-range basses with the French horns, they love to sit in a melody or a harmonic position, and maybe a third or a fifth above what the string's doing is usually a great way. The pianos, just holding some block chords to help you through, and then just a live melody sitting on top, and supported by some woodwinds in the top end there. So there you go. All right, so let's wrap up this video. We're getting close to the end now. I'll take you through my final thoughts and we'll wrap up from there. Okay, so some final thoughts. Firstly, a declaration. I've always been a massive fan of Spitfire audio, and they do occupy a big part of my musical journey. And to be honest, I'm the slightly embarrassed owner of more Spitfire libraries from across their entire range than someone of my musical skills can justify. That said, I'm quite jealous that new budding composers today have access to an awesome range of instruments, and with the Originals Orchestra coming in at $99, euros or pounds, that's an awesome price point for what you get. This stage of your journey is the time to apply the dedication needed to learn the art of composition itself. And if you do, then when the time comes to get one of their higher end libraries, then your music will really leap off the page. The Originals Orchestra will help get you there. The plugin is really easy to use, and while it does have a limited subset of the functionality that's available in Spitfire's professional range of products, the important thing here is that you got access to the core features that every composer uses, including expression and dynamics control, mic positions, and quite an extensive set of articulations. All these features are the foundations of every professional library you will ever get in the future. If it's time for you to advance beyond something like the free BBC Symphony Orchestra's Discover or the Labs range, then this just might be a great stepping stone for you. So that wraps up today's video. All that's left for me to do now is to say thank you for stopping by and spending some of your precious time with me. At the Sampleist, we absolutely love doing this as our contribution to the virtual instrument community. So to help us out, give us a thumbs up for all the great content we produce. Leave me a comment telling me what you think of Spitfire Audio's Originals Orchestra, and of course, be sure to subscribe to stay on top of the latest and greatest virtual instrument releases. This is Greg Revell for the Sampleist signing off, and as always, urging you to find your sounds and find your soul. Bye for now.